There was a man who spent 98% of his workday browsing the internet. Not exaggerating, 98%. He had a college degree from an elite university. He had ambitions, he had plans, but he couldn't focus for more than a few minutes at a time. 6 months later, that same man was earning $100,000 a year as a software developer, working with laser-like focus for 8 hours a day. What changed? He discovered a skill that Cal Newport calls deep work. And it didn't just change his career, it changed the entire wiring of his brain. Today, I'm going to walk you through every idea in this extraordinary book. Deep Work by Cal Newport is one of those rare books that doesn't just give you advice, it changes the way you see the world. Once you understand what deep work is and why it matters, you'll start noticing it everywhere. In the habits of the most successful people you admire, in the patterns that separate those who create extraordinary things from those who just stay busy, and most uncomfortably, in the ways your own daily habits might be sabotaging your potential. Cal Newport isn't some productivity guru selling you morning routines and cold showers. He's a tenured computer science professor at Georgetown University who earned his PhD at MIT. He published 4 books and dozens of peer-reviewed academic papers before he turned 30, all while rarely working past 5 in the evening. He's never had a Facebook account. He didn't own a smartphone until 2012, and only because his pregnant wife told him he needed a working phone before their son was born. In other words, Newport doesn't just theorize about focus, he lives it. And this book is his attempt to explain why that focus has been so powerful and how you can cultivate it in your own life. Over the next hour, I'll walk you through every key idea, from the economics of why deep work is now more valuable than ever, to the neuroscience of why it makes you happier, to the specific strategies Newport lays out for building it into your daily routine. Whether you're a student, an entrepreneur, a creative, or someone who just feels like they're spinning their wheels despite working all day, this book has something for you. Let's get into it. Newport opens his book with a story that perfectly captures what deep work looks like in practice. In 1922, the famous psychiatrist Carl Jung was locked in one of the most intense intellectual battles of his era. He had recently published a book that broke from the ideas of his mentor, Sigmund Freud. And in the 1920s, disagreeing with Freud was not a casual move. It was career-defining. Jung needed to produce a stream of brilliant, original work to establish his own school of thought and prove that his break from Freud was justified. So what did Jung do? He bought a plot of land near Lake Zurich in Switzerland and built a stone tower. No electricity, no distractions. He would rise at 7 in the morning, eat a large breakfast, then spend 2 hours writing in a private room that he kept locked. No one else was allowed in without his permission. In the afternoons, he would meditate or take long walks through the countryside. By 10 at night, he was in bed, reading by oil lamp and fireplace. Now here's what's important about this. Jung was not on vacation. He had a thriving clinical practice in Zurich. He was seeing patients late into the evening. He was active in the city's intellectual life, attending lectures and coffeehouse discussions. He was incredibly busy, but he understood something that most of us miss. Busyness alone would never be enough to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. To change the way the world understood the human mind, he needed something deeper. He needed sustained, uninterrupted concentration on the hardest problems in his field. He needed what Cal Newport calls deep work. And here's the thing, Jung is not an outlier. When you look at the habits of history's most influential thinkers, this pattern appears again and again. The essayist Michel de Montaigne did his writing in a private library built into the tower of his French chateau. Mark Twain wrote much of Tom Sawyer in a shed so isolated from the main house that his family had to blow a horn to get his attention at mealtimes. Woody Allen wrote and directed 44 films over 44 years, 23 Academy Award nominations, and he never owned a computer. He did all his writing on a manual typewriter. When the physicist Peter Higgs won the Nobel Prize, journalists couldn't even find him to tell him he was that disconnected from the world. Even J.K. Rowling, who does use a computer, was famously absent from social media during the years she was writing Harry Potter, even though social media was exploding around her. When her team finally created a Twitter account in her name, her only tweet for the first year and a half was essentially, "This is really me, but don't expect to hear from me much. Writing comes first. Think about it. These are some of the most productive and creative people who ever lived. And every single one of them, in their own way, was practicing deep work. Before we get into the specific arguments, I want to flesh out the story I opened with, because it perfectly captures everything this book is about. Jason Ben was a financial consultant. He'd graduated from the University of Virginia with an economics degree. On paper, he had everything going for him, but not long after starting his job, he realized something terrifying. The vast majority of his work could be automated by a basic Excel script. His firm produced reports for banks involved in complex deals. The process required hours of manually moving data between spreadsheets. It took Ben up to 6 hours per report when he first started, so he taught himself about Excel macros, little automated scripts, and built a worksheet that could do the entire process with essentially a single button click. 6 hours of work, reduced to less than 1. Now, most people would celebrate that efficiency. But Ben saw it differently. If his entire contribution could be replaced by a macro, what exactly was his value? He had ambitions. He wanted a real career, and he realized that as long as his main skills could be captured in an automated script, those ambitions would go nowhere. So Ben made a bold decision. He would quit his job and become a computer programmer. There was just one problem. He had absolutely no idea how to write code, and there was a bigger problem beneath that one. Ben couldn't focus. By his own admission, he spent almost 98% of his time at the finance job surfing the web. His supervisor once asked him to write a business plan, a real opportunity to distinguish himself, and Ben couldn't even get through reading 5 existing plans for comparison. His mind simply wouldn't stay on task. So when Ben committed to learning programming, he knew he had to solve 2 problems simultaneously. He had to learn a hard new skill, and he had to train his brain to concentrate. His method was drastic. He locked himself in a room with no computer, just textbooks, note cards, and a highlighter. He would read the programming textbooks, transfer the ideas to note cards, then practice them out loud. No screens, no internet, no escape. At first, it was agonizing. His brain screamed for distraction, but with no alternative available, he had no choice but to push through. Day after day, week after week, he built his ability to focus. Eventually, he was clocking 5 or more hours per day of completely disconnected, concentrated study. He read about 18 books on programming in those 2 months. Then he attended Dev Boot Camp, a notoriously intense 100-hour-a-week crash course in web development. One student with a PhD from Princeton had called it the hardest thing he'd ever done. Only half the students who started with Ben ended up graduating on time. Ben not only graduated, he was the top student in his class. And within weeks, he landed a developer job at a San Francisco startup, earning $100,000 a year. Just 6 months earlier, he'd been making $40,000, spending his days mindlessly clicking around the internet. When Newport last spoke with Ben, he'd rented an apartment across the street from his office so he could arrive early and work without distraction. On good days, he'd get 4 hours of pure focus before his first meeting, then another 3 to 4 in the afternoon. No email, no browsing, just programming. From 98% of his day wasted to 7 or 8 hours of intense productive focus. That transformation wasn't about talent. It wasn't about a lucky break. It was about deep work, the skill that changed everything. Ask yourself, what would your life look like if you could make even half that transformation? But here's the problem. While deep work was powering these extraordinary achievements, the rest of the working world was moving in the exact opposite direction. Newport defines deep work as focused concentration without distraction that pushes your thinking to its absolute limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. And then he defines its opposite, shallow work. Tasks that don't demand much cognitive effort, logistical, routine stuff you could do while half distracted. These efforts tend not to create much new value and are easy to replicate. Think about your own day. How much of it is deep and how much of it is shallow? For most knowledge workers, Newport argues, the answer is disturbing. A McKinsey study found that the average knowledge worker spends more than 60% of the workweek on electronic communication and internet searching. Close to 30% of their time goes just to reading and answering email alone. Let that sink in. 60% of the workweek gone. Not to the work that defines your career, not to the projects that build your skills, not to the thinking that creates real value, but to shuffling information around like a human network router. And it's getting worse, not better. The rise of instant messaging, social media, open offices, and smartphones has fragmented our attention into slivers. We're busier than ever, but we're rarely doing the kind of concentrated, demanding work that actually moves the needle. And here's the truly scary part. Spend enough time in this state of fragmented attention, and you don't just lose the habit of going deep, you lose the capacity for it. As one journalist admitted, the internet seemed to be chipping away at his ability to concentrate and contemplate, and he wasn't the only one. Newport's core argument, what he calls the deep work hypothesis, is this. The capacity for deep work is growing scarcer at the precise moment the economy is rewarding it more than ever. As a consequence, the few who cultivate this skill and make it the core of their working life will thrive. Rare and valuable. That's the combination. And if you can position yourself on the right side of that equation, the rewards are enormous. So why exactly is deep work becoming more valuable? To answer that, Newport turns to economics, specifically the research of MIT economists Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee. Their argument is that we're living through what they call a great restructuring. Technology isn't just changing jobs, it's splitting them. An increasing number of workers are seeing their skills become automatable or easily outsourced. But at the same time, certain groups are not only surviving, they're thriving more than ever before. Newport identifies 3 groups who win in this new economy. The first is high-skilled workers, people who can work creatively with intelligent machines. Think data scientists, programmers, analysts, anyone who can tease valuable results out of complex technology. The second group is superstars, the very best in their field, who now compete in a global marketplace thanks to communication technology. And the third is owners of capital, venture capitalists and investors who fund the machines driving the restructuring. So which group are you in? And more importantly, how do you get into one of the winning ones? Unless you've got a pile of venture capital sitting around. And if you do, congratulations. The path forward for most of us lies in joining one of the first 2 groups. And Newport argues that doing so requires 2 core abilities. Number 1, the ability to quickly master hard things. Number 2, the ability to produce at an elite level in terms of both quality and speed. Think about it. If you can't learn complex new skills rapidly, you can't keep up with a world where the tools and technologies change every few years. Some of the programming languages that are essential today didn't even exist a decade ago, and they'll probably be obsolete a decade from now. The same is true in marketing, medicine, finance. The landscape keeps shifting, and the people who can adapt fastest are the ones who survive. And learning isn't enough. You also have to transform that knowledge into tangible results. Lots of people can learn things, but producing something valuable, something that other people will pay for or admire or use, that requires a different level of effort. Here's where it all connects. Both of these abilities, learning hard things and producing elite work, depend on your ability to perform deep work. To make this concrete, think about Nate Silver, the data analyst who became a household name by accurately forecasting election results. In 2012, his blog drove more than 70% of the traffic to the entire New York Times website. Not the front page, not the columnists, a baseball stats guy turned political forecaster. Silver was eventually lured away by ESPN and ABC News in a major deal. Why was he so valuable? Because he could do something incredibly difficult: wrangle complex databases, run sophisticated statistical analyses, and translate the results into predictions that millions of people cared about. But here's what people miss about Silver's work. It's not as simple as typing a question into a search engine. He maintains massive databases of poll results from hundreds of pollsters. He feeds them into professional statistical analysis software. He builds intricate models with multiple regressions, custom parameters, and probabilistic expressions, and the tools keep changing. What Silver needed to master 5 years ago is different from what he needs today, which will be different again in 5 more years. To stay valuable, you must master hard things again and again. And each round of mastery requires deep work. There are no shortcuts. If you can't learn, you can't thrive. And you can't learn without depth. Let's start with the learning side. Newport draws on the research of K. Anders Ericsson, the psychologist behind the concept of deliberate practice. Ericsson studied what separates experts from everyone else and concluded that it wasn't innate talent. It was a specific kind of practice characterized by 2 things. First, your attention is focused tightly on the specific skill you're trying to improve. Second, you receive feedback so you can adjust your approach. The critical point is that first component, focused attention. Deliberate practice cannot exist alongside distraction. Scattered attention is, as Ericsson put it, essentially the opposite of what deliberate practice demands. And neuroscience backs this up. When you focus intensely on a specific skill, you're firing a specific neural circuit again and again. This repetition triggers cells in your brain to start wrapping layers of a fatty tissue called myelin around those neurons, like adding insulation to an electrical wire. The more myelin, the faster and cleaner the circuit fires. To be great at something, in a very literal sense, is to be well myelinated. But here's the catch. This only works if you isolate the right circuit. If you're trying to learn something complex while simultaneously checking social media, you're firing too many circuits at once. It's like trying to strengthen a specific muscle while flailing every limb in your body. The myelination doesn't happen. The skill doesn't develop. You've spent the time, but you haven't done the work. To learn hard things quickly, you must focus intensely without distraction. Learning, in other words, is an act of deep work. Now let's talk about producing. Newport introduces us to Adam Grant, who at the time of writing was the youngest professor to ever receive tenure, and then full professorship, at the Wharton School of Business. In a single year, Grant published 7 articles in major academic journals, which is an absurd rate for his field. He also wrote a best-selling book that ended up on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. So how does Grant pull this off? He batches his work. He stacks all his teaching into the fall semester, freeing the spring and summer for pure research. And within those research periods, he alternates between open-door periods where he's available to colleagues and deep isolation periods lasting 3 to 4 days where he shuts everything down. He puts up an out-of-office autoresponder even though he's sitting right there in his office. His colleagues would see him through the window and say, "You're not out of the office. I can see you right now." But Grant understood something important. Every time you switch tasks, even for a moment, your attention doesn't fully follow. A residue of your previous task lingers, cluttering your thinking. A researcher named Sophie Leroy proved this in the lab. She called it attention residue. And she found that people who experience it perform significantly worse on whatever they do next. Let me make this even more personal. Think about the last time you were working on something important, maybe writing a report, preparing a presentation, or solving a problem. Now think about whether you checked your email or phone during that work session. If you did, and let's be honest, most of us do, here's what happened in your brain. Even if you only glanced at your inbox for 10 seconds, your attention didn't fully return to your primary task afterward. A piece of your mind stayed behind, processing whatever you saw. A message from your boss you couldn't deal with right then. A request that would need a response later. A reminder of something you forgot. This residue clings to your thinking, and the result is measurable. People experiencing attention residue perform significantly worse on whatever they do next. Now multiply this by the dozens of times per day most people check their email or phone. Each check creates a new layer of residue. By mid-afternoon, your mind is so cluttered with half-processed obligations that sustaining real concentration on anything becomes nearly impossible. By working on a single hard task for extended periods without switching, Grant minimizes this residue. He maximizes what Newport captures in a simple formula. High-quality work produced equals time spent multiplied by intensity of focus. That's it. That's the formula. And it explains why Grant can outproduce colleagues who work just as many hours or more. It's not about working longer, it's about working deeper. Now, before you fully buy into the deep work hypothesis, Newport anticipates an objection you might be thinking. What about incredibly successful people who seem to thrive without depth? Think about someone like Jack Dorsey, co-founder of Twitter, founder of Square. At the time Newport was writing, Dorsey was managing both companies simultaneously, ending each day with 30 to 40 sets of meeting notes. He worked at stand-up tables where anyone could approach him. And yet, Dorsey was among the top 1,000 richest people in the world. But Newport has an important response. Dorsey's success doesn't disprove the value of deep work. It reflects the specific nature of his role. A CEO is essentially a decision engine. The value Dorsey provides comes from his accumulated experience and market instincts applied to a rapid stream of inputs throughout the day. Asking a CEO to spend 4 hours thinking deeply about one problem would actually be a waste of their unique value. But this is specific to executives. You cannot extrapolate Dorsey's work style to your own job and expect similar results. And even in roles where distraction seems unavoidable, like management consulting, the evidence suggests there's far more room for depth than people assume. So before you write off deep work as incompatible with your job, ask yourself honestly, is the distraction truly necessary, or has it just become comfortable? If deep work is so valuable, why isn't everyone doing it? Why are companies actively pushing their employees towards shallow work? Newport identifies 3 forces that explain this paradox. The first is what he calls the metric black hole. Simply put, it's nearly impossible to measure the bottom-line impact of most knowledge work behaviors. Tom Cochran, the chief technology officer of Atlantic Media, once tried to calculate what email was actually costing his company. He had to gather company-wide data on emails sent per day, average word counts, typing speeds, reading speeds, and salary information, then run it all through a statistical model. The result? The company was spending well over $1 million a year just to have people process email. A free communication tool had hidden costs equivalent to buying a small private jet, but even after all that work, the answer was hard to pin down. He couldn't cleanly separate how much value that email usage was also creating. And if it's that hard to measure something as simple as email's impact, imagine trying to quantify the value of deep work versus shallow work across an entire organization. The second force is what Newport calls the principle of least resistance. In a business setting, without clear feedback on what actually helps the bottom line, people naturally gravitate toward whatever is easiest in the moment. Keeping your inbox open all day? Easier than planning your work in advance. Scheduling a weekly status meeting? Easier than actually managing your project yourself. Forwarding an email with a quick thoughts? Easier than doing the thinking yourself. None of these behaviors are evil. They're just easy. And in the absence of proof that they're hurting anything, easy wins every time. The third force is what Newport calls busyness as a proxy for productivity. Most knowledge workers can't point to a single metric that defines their success the way a physicist can point to published papers. So they substitute visible activity, rapid-fire emails, packed calendars, breathless replies for actual output. Let me paint you a picture of just how far we've gone in the wrong direction. In 2012, Facebook unveiled plans for its new headquarters, what Mark Zuckerberg proudly called the largest open floor plan in the world. More than 3,000 employees working on movable furniture spread across a 10-acre expanse. No walls, no offices, just a vast sea of people and screens. It sounds appealing in theory, but a neuroscientist studying open offices for a television special found that background noise, even when you're not consciously aware of it, disrupts concentration. A phone ringing nearby, a conversation across the room, even footsteps. Your brain responds to these distractions whether you like it or not. And then there's the social media mandate. Serious journalists at major newspapers are now expected to tweet regularly, interrupting the deep investigative work that actually gives their paper its reputation to provide free content to a social media company. One New Yorker staff writer admitted his refusal to tweet came from fear. He was afraid that if he started, it would consume him. That same year, he won the National Book Award. Newport tells the story of Leslie Perlow, a Harvard Business School professor who ran a fascinating experiment at the Boston Consulting Group, one of the most intense, always-on management consulting firms in the world. She convinced one team to try something radical. Each member would take one full day per week completely offline. No email, no calls, no connectivity to anyone inside or outside the company. The partner in charge was terrified. The consultants were terrified. They thought they were putting their careers at risk, but the clients didn't care. The team's work actually improved. They communicated better with each other, they learned more, and they delivered a better product. The constant connectivity that everyone assumed was essential turned out to be a habit, not a necessity. And the late Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman had a brilliantly simple approach to this same problem. He called himself actively irresponsible. He told everyone he didn't do anything. Any request for committee work or administrative duties, the answer was no. His reasoning was elegant. Doing real physics requires long stretches of uninterrupted concentration. Everything else is a threat to that concentration. Feynman had clarity about what mattered. Most knowledge workers don't. And without that clarity, busyness fills the void. So far, we've talked about deep work from an economic perspective. It helps you earn more and produce more. But Newport argues that the case for depth goes far beyond money. A deep life, he says, is not just economically lucrative. It's a life well lived, and he supports this claim from three different angles. The first is neurological. Newport draws on the work of science writer Winifred Gallagher, who stumbled onto a profound insight after receiving a devastating cancer diagnosis. Walking out of the hospital, she made a decision. This disease wanted to dominate her attention, but she would focus on what was good in her life instead. And to her surprise, it worked. Her treatment was brutal, but her daily experience was often quite pleasant. Curious, Gallagher spent the next 5 years investigating the science of attention. What she found changed her life. Our brains construct our worldview based on what we focus on. Focus on a cancer diagnosis, and your life feels dark. Focus on an evening out with friends, and it feels bright. Even though the diagnosis hasn't changed, researchers confirm this at the neurological level. One Stanford psychologist used brain scanning technology and found that elderly subjects had literally trained their prefrontal cortex to suppress their emotional response to negative images. They weren't happier because their lives were better. They were happier because they had rewired their brains to focus on what was good. Think about what this means for your work life. If you spend your day immersed in deep, meaningful work, solving hard problems, creating something new, pushing your skills, your brain interprets your life as rich and important. But if you spend your day bouncing between email, social media, scheduling conflicts, and office politics, your brain constructs a reality dominated by stress, irritation, and triviality. The world represented by your inbox is not a pleasant world to inhabit. The second angle is psychological. Newport draws on Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow states. Those moments when you're so absorbed in a challenging activity that you lose track of time. Csikszentmihalyi's studies found something counterintuitive. People were happier at work than during their leisure time. Jobs have built-in goals, feedback, and challenges, the ingredients of flow. Free time, by contrast, is unstructured and actually requires more effort to shape into something enjoyable. Deep work naturally generates flow. The more flow experiences you have in a given week, the higher your overall life satisfaction. So when you resist going deep, when you retreat to the shallow comfort of email and social media, you're not just being less productive, you're choosing to be less happy. The third angle is philosophical. The philosophers Hubert Dreyfus and Sean Dorrance Kelly traced the history of meaning through Western civilization and arrived at a troubling conclusion about our present moment. We used to live in a world that felt imbued with sacredness and order, but the Enlightenment, for all its gifts, also stripped away the structures that provided that meaning. Their proposed solution is craftsmanship. When a master wheelwright shapes a piece of wood, the meaning isn't something he invents, it's something he discovers in the material itself. Each piece of wood has its own character, its own potential. The craftsman develops an intimate relationship with the material, and brings out the qualities that are already there. And here's the revolutionary insight. This doesn't apply only to traditional crafts. Any pursuit that demands high skill and deep engagement can generate this same sense of meaning. A young coding prodigy described writing beautiful code in terms that could come from a woodworker's mouth, short, concise, like writing a poem. A respected programming book quotes the medieval quarry worker's creed: "We who cut mere stones must always be envisioning cathedrals." You don't need a rarefied job to find meaning. You need a rarefied approach to your work. A wooden wheel is not a noble object, but the act of shaping it with skill, with attention, with care, can be deeply meaningful. And the same is true for whatever you do for a living. But cultivating craftsmanship is necessarily a deep task. You can't develop mastery in a state of distraction. Deep work is the bridge between your daily efforts and the sense of purpose that makes those efforts worthwhile. Newport sums up Part 1 beautifully. Whether you look at deep work through the lens of neuroscience, psychology, or philosophy, the conclusion is the same. A deep life is a good life, any way you look at it. Now the question becomes, how do you actually build this kind of life? That's what Part 2 is all about. Newport lays out 4 rules, 4 practical strategies for making deep work the foundation of your professional life. Let's dive in. Newport opens this section with a concept I love. An architect named David Dewayne designed what he calls the eudaimonia machine. Eudaimonia is an ancient Greek word meaning the state of achieving your full human potential. In the machine, it's actually a building. Imagine a long, narrow structure made up of 5 rooms in a line. You have to walk through each one to get to the next. There's no hallway to skip ahead. The first room is a gallery filled with examples of deep work, meant to inspire you. The second is a salon with coffee and couches, a place for stimulating conversation. The third is a library storing all previous work and research. The fourth is a standard office for shallow tasks. And the fifth room, deep work chambers. 6 by 10 feet, enclosed by 18 inches of soundproof insulation. You go in, you work for 90 minutes, you take a 90-minute break, and you repeat. Now the eudaimonia machine only exists on paper. But Newport uses it to make a crucial point. In an ideal world, our work environments would be designed for depth. In reality, we're disciples of depth trapped in a shallow world. So how do we fight back? Newport's first rule is to develop deliberate strategies for integrating deep work into your life, because willpower alone won't cut it. A study tracked over 200 adults for a week and found that people fight desires all day long. Among the top cravings, taking a break from hard work, checking email, surfing the web. And people only successfully resisted these distractions about half the time. Even worse, willpower is a finite resource. Every time you resist a temptation, you deplete it. By the afternoon, your resistance is running on fumes. The solution isn't more willpower, it's smarter routines. The key to developing a deep work habit is to build routines and rituals that minimize the amount of willpower you need to start and maintain concentration. Don't rely on motivation, build a system. And Newport offers 4 different philosophies for how to do this. The first is the monastic philosophy, the most extreme. You eliminate all shallow work from your life. The computer scientist Donald Knuth does this. He hasn't had an email address since 1990. If you want to reach him, you write a physical letter to his administrative assistant, who sorts through the mail and brings him anything relevant every 3 months. His reasoning is simple. His role isn't to be on top of things. His role is to be on the bottom of things. The novelist Neil Stevenson takes a similar approach. His website has no email address. His explanation: given long, uninterrupted blocks, he can write novels. Fragment that time, and his output drops dramatically. The second philosophy is bimodal. This is what Carl Jung practiced. You divide your time between clearly defined deep stretches and everything else stretches. During the deep periods, you act like a monk. During the shallow periods, you're fully present and accessible. Think about Jung again. He wasn't a hermit. He ran a thriving practice in Zurich, saw patients late into the evening, and was deeply embedded in the city's intellectual life. His daily life would look familiar to any modern professional, but periodically, He would retreat to Bullingen, and during those retreats, he was completely monastic. Adam Grant demonstrates this at a more granular level. Within his research semesters, he alternates between open periods where he's famously accessible and closed periods of 2 to 4 days where he's completely unreachable. The open periods recharge his social capital. The closed periods transform ideas into published papers. Both are essential. If you're thinking bimodal sounds impossible in your job, remember, even Boston Consulting Group consultants found that forced disconnection improved their work. Most people overestimate how much their constant availability matters. The third philosophy, and the one Newport says works for the most people, is the rhythmic philosophy, the daily habit approach. You choose a set time every day for deep work, and you do it without exception. Newport shares the story of a doctoral candidate named Brian Chappell, who had a full-time job and a new baby. His first year, working in an ad hoc fashion, he produced only one dissertation chapter. Then he switched to a rhythmic approach, waking at 4:45 every morning and writing until 7:30 before going to work. Result? 4 to 5 pages of academic prose per day. A complete chapter every 2 to 3 weeks. This connects to what's sometimes called the Seinfeld chain method. Jerry Seinfeld told a young comic that the secret to better jokes was writing every day. He kept a calendar and marked a big red X on every day he wrote. Your only job is to not break the chain. The fourth philosophy is the journalistic approach, fitting deep work wherever you can. Walter Isaacson used this while writing his first book alongside his day job at Time magazine. He would retreat to a quiet room for 20 minutes or an hour whenever free time appeared, pound away at his typewriter, then rejoin everyone as if nothing had happened. Newport warns that this is the hardest approach. It requires practice and confidence. But for someone with an unpredictable schedule, it can be powerful. Beyond choosing a philosophy, Newport emphasizes that you need rituals. The most creative minds in history didn't wait for inspiration. The biographer Robert Caro has governed every inch of his office by rules for decades. Charles Darwin followed the same rigid schedule every day for years while working on The Origin of Species. As the journalist Mason Curry concluded after studying hundreds of creative geniuses, the single best piece of advice for anyone trying to do creative work is to ignore inspiration. Build a ritual that makes depth automatic. Your ritual should address 3 things. Where and for how long will you work? What rules will you follow once you start? And what support does your brain need? Newport also introduces grand gestures. Sometimes, to get into the right mindset, you need to make a dramatic commitment. J.K. Rowling was struggling to finish the final Harry Potter book at home. The window cleaner came, the kids were loud, the dogs were barking. So she checked into a suite at the 5-star Balmoral Hotel in Edinburgh, just blocks from Edinburgh Castle. She didn't plan to stay, but the writing went so well that she kept coming back and finished the entire series there. Bill Gates would take think weeks, retreating to a lakeside cottage with nothing but papers and books. It was during one of these weeks that he recognized the internet as a tidal wave that would reshape the tech industry. One entrepreneur even booked a round-trip business-class flight to Tokyo for the uninterrupted focus. He wrote the entire flight there, drank an espresso in the lounge, turned around and wrote the entire flight back. 30 hours later, completed manuscript. $4,000 well spent. The point isn't luxury. It's that making a grand commitment signals to your brain that this task matters. Sometimes, to go deep, you first have to go big. Newport also explores the relationship between depth and collaboration through the lens of 2 legendary innovation hubs, Building 20 at MIT and Bell Labs. Both are famous for producing extraordinary breakthroughs, and neither was an open-plan office. They both used private offices connected by long hallways. The hallways forced researchers from different disciplines to bump into each other, sparking unexpected connections. But when they had an idea worth pursuing, they retreated to their offices and closed the door. Newport calls this the hub and spoke model. Get inspired together in the hub, then go deep in the spoke. The transistor was invented at Bell Labs by 2 researchers who spent a month working side by side, one running experiments, the other refining theories. Together, they pushed deeper than either could have gone alone. Newport calls this the whiteboard effect. Collaborative deep work, where another person's presence short-circuits your tendency to avoid the hardest thinking. Newport then introduces what might be the most practical framework in the entire book: the 4 disciplines of execution, adapted from corporate strategy. The backstory is great. Clayton Christensen once presented his disruption theory to Intel's CEO Andy Grove. After the presentation, Grove said something memorable. "You're such a naive academic. I asked you how to do it, and you told me what I should do. I know what to do, I just don't know how." That gap between what and how is exactly what these disciplines solve. Discipline 1. Focus on the wildly important. Identify a specific, ambitious outcome for your deep work. Not do more deep work, but something like publish 5 peer-reviewed papers this year. Discipline 2. Act on the lead measures. Track hours spent in deep work, not just final outcomes. Hours are something you can directly control today. Stay with me here, because this next one is the trick that made the whole system click for Newport. Discipline 3. Keep a compelling scoreboard. Newport taped a card to his wall with rows for each week and tallied his deep work hours. When he hit a major milestone, he circled the corresponding tick mark. That visual connection between accumulated hours and tangible results was powerfully motivating. Discipline 4. Create a cadence of accountability. A weekly review where you examine your scoreboard, celebrate good weeks, analyze bad ones, and plan ahead. Now, does this sound like a lot of corporate jargon? I thought so too. But look at the results. In the year Newport deployed this system, he published 9 peer-reviewed papers, more than double his previous best. Same hours in the day, same job, dramatically better system. The final strategy in Rule 1 might surprise you. Newport argues that you should be lazy, at least after work hours. At the end of the workday, shut down completely. No checking email after dinner. No mentally replaying conversations. Complete cognitive shutdown. 3 reasons this matters. First, downtime aids insights. Research suggests that for complex decisions involving lots of variables, your unconscious mind actually outperforms your conscious mind, but only if you give it room to work. Second, downtime recharges your focus. Your ability to concentrate is a finite resource that depletes throughout the day. Evening activities, walks, dinner with family, reading, let your focused attention recover, but checking email all evening prevents that recovery. Third, the work you do in the evening probably isn't that important anyway. Even experts max out at about 4 hours of deep work per day. Any evening work will be shallow and low energy. Newport recommends developing a shutdown ritual. At the end of each workday, review your inbox, capture outstanding tasks, check your calendar, make a rough plan for tomorrow, and then say a specific phrase. Newport uses shutdown complete. The science behind this is the Zeigarnik effect. Incomplete tasks hijack your attention, but research showed that you don't need to complete a task to release it. You just need a trusted plan for how you'll handle it. The shutdown ritual creates that plan. Your brain gets the message. Everything is handled. You can rest. Once you say those words, no work intrusions are allowed. Not even a quick email glance. Even a brief incursion can trigger a cascade of thoughts that undoes the entire benefit. It takes a week or 2 before your mind trusts the ritual, but once it does, skipping it will feel as uncomfortable as leaving the house without locking the door. When you work, work hard. When you're done, be done. Rule 2 tackles something most people overlook. Deep work is a skill that requires training. You can't just decide to focus and expect your brain to cooperate, especially if you've spent years teaching it to crave constant stimulation. Newport introduces us to Adam Marlin, a businessman who took up daily Talmud study as an adult. Every morning, he'd spend time wrestling with one of the most intellectually demanding texts in existence. As his rabbi told him, "You cannot consider yourself as fulfilling this obligation unless you have stretched to the reaches of your mental capacity." What fascinated Marlin was that fellow practitioners who'd been studying since childhood, many from small religious schools, could run intellectual circles around him, despite his 3 Ivy League degrees. Their daily mental practice had built cognitive muscles he was only beginning to develop. Over time, Marlon noticed the benefits bleeding into his professional life. More creative insights, sharper thinking, consistent deep practice doesn't just improve the specific skill you're practicing, it strengthens your general ability to concentrate. But here's the flip side. Constant distraction trains your brain for distraction, and once that wiring takes hold, it's hard to undo. Clifford Nass at Stanford found that chronic multitaskers couldn't filter out irrelevant information, couldn't manage their working memory, and were perpetually distracted. They were, in his assessment, mental wrecks. The most disturbing finding? When these multitaskers claimed they could laser focus when it really mattered, they were wrong. They'd developed habits that made true concentration impossible, but they didn't know it. This means that if every moment of potential boredom in your life is filled with a quick glance at your smartphone, you are actively training your brain to be unable to focus. Even if you schedule deep work sessions, your brain won't cooperate. So how do you fix this? Newport's central insight is counterintuitive. Don't take breaks from distraction. Instead, take breaks from focus. Most advice tells you to occasionally disconnect, a digital detox weekend. Newport says this gets it backward. If you eat healthy 1 day a week and binge the other 6, you won't lose weight. Instead, schedule specific times when you're allowed to use the internet and stay completely offline outside those blocks. Keep a notepad near your computer. Write down the next time you're allowed to go online. Until that time arrives, no connectivity. Even if your job requires heavy internet use, this works. Just schedule more frequent internet blocks. The total time online doesn't matter nearly as much as maintaining the integrity of your offline periods. And if you're in an offline block and desperately need something from the internet, resist. Switch to a different offline task. If that's truly impossible, reschedule your next internet block, but enforce at least a 5-minute gap. That gap separates the desire to go online from the reward of doing so. You're training your brain that wanting distraction and getting it are two different things. The most powerful moment comes when you're standing in line somewhere or waiting for a friend and you reach for your phone, then stop. You put it back, you're bored, and you don't fill the boredom with anything. That simple act of tolerating boredom is incredibly valuable concentration training. Newport then offers what might be my favorite tactic: Roosevelt dashes. Theodore Roosevelt earned honor grades at Harvard while spending only about a quarter of his day on schoolwork. The rest was filled with boxing, wrestling, dance lessons, poetry, and naturalism. He even published his first book as a freshman. His secret was intensity. Whatever time fragments remained, he devoted exclusively to studying with blistering, undivided concentration. As one biographer noted, the time he spent at his desk was small, but his focus was so intense that he could afford more time off than most. Newport suggests you inject occasional Roosevelt dashes into your own workday. Take an important deep task, cut the time you'd normally allow for it dramatically, set a visible countdown timer, and attack with total intensity, like interval training for your brain. Newport also recommends productive meditation, using time when you're physically occupied but mentally free to focus on a single professional problem. Walking, commuting, doing chores, structure it. Identify the key variables, define the specific question you need to answer, and focus on it, returning your attention whenever it wanders. And one final strategy in Rule 2, memory training. Daniel Kilov, an Australian memory champion, wasn't born with exceptional abilities. In high school, he was forgetful, disorganized, and diagnosed with ADHD. But after training his memory, he went from a struggling student to graduating with first-class honors and entering a PhD program. Researchers found that the biggest cognitive difference between memory athletes and everyone else wasn't memory, it was attentional control. Memory training is really concentration training in disguise. Nobody expects to run a marathon without training. But when it comes to concentration, we expect to flip a switch and focus for hours on demand. It doesn't work that way. Depth is a skill, and like any skill, it responds to practice. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Quit social media? Really? Newport isn't asking everyone to delete all their accounts. but he is asking you to rethink how you make decisions about the tools you use. The problem is what he calls the any benefit mindset. If you can identify any possible benefit from a tool, that's enough to justify using it. Facebook helps you stay in touch with old friends? Keep it. Twitter might build an audience? Keep it. But think about this in any other context. A farmer doesn't buy equipment just because it offers some benefit. Newport tells the story of Forrest Pritchard, who decided to sell his hay baler after weighing not just the direct costs, but the opportunity costs. The time he could spend raising chickens instead, the soil compaction from heavy machinery, the nutrients he'd gained from buying hay externally. Every tool has benefits and costs. The farmer considers both. Why should knowledge workers be any less thoughtful? Newport proposes the craftsman approach to tool selection. Identify the core factors that determine success and happiness in your life. Adopt a tool only if its positive impacts on these factors substantially outweigh its negatives. Try this right now. Think about the app you use most. Does it substantially help the 1 or 2 activities that matter most to your career? Be honest. This connects to the law of the vital few. Roughly 20% of your activities produce 80% of your results. If social media falls in the bottom 80%, every minute you spend on it is stolen from the activities that actually move your life forward. Malcolm Gladwell, Michael Lewis, and George Packer are among the most successful writers alive. None use Twitter. They're not anti-technology. They've simply concluded that the benefits don't outweigh the costs for their specific situations. Newport suggests a powerful experiment. Quit all social media for 30 days. Don't deactivate your accounts. Don't announce you're leaving. Just stop. After 30 days, ask 2 questions. Would my last 30 days have been notably better with these services? And did anyone actually care that I was gone? For most people, the answers are no and no. The conversations you missed were trivial. The opportunities found other channels. Your life continued and probably improved. And don't announce the break, because that tests the second illusion that people need your online presence. The average Twitter user has around 200 followers. That can create a sense of importance, but social media has replaced the hard work of earning attention with a shallow collective agreement. I'll pay attention to you if you pay attention to me, regardless of whether either of us has anything worth saying. And what about all the free time you reclaim? Newport channels Arnold Bennett, a writer from 1910 who argued that the 16 hours outside work are a day within a day. Instead of filling them with digital junk food, use them deliberately. Read books, pursue hobbies, exercise, have real conversations. Bennett's most counterintuitive insight: structured leisure makes you more energized, not less. The mental faculties don't tire like muscles. They just need change, not rest. Fill your free time with meaningful activity, and you'll end each day more fulfilled and begin the next one more refreshed. Your ability to do deep work during the day is directly affected by how you spend your evenings. The final rule is about reclaiming your schedule from shallow work. Newport starts with a crucial experiment from Basecamp, formerly 37 Signals. When they shortened their work week from 5 days to 4, employees got the same amount done. Founder Jason Fried explained that very few people actually work 8 productive hours. Once you subtract meetings, interruptions, and web surfing, you're lucky to get a few real hours. The 4-day week simply squeezed out the fat. Then Basecamp went further, giving employees the entire month of June for self-directed deep projects. No status meetings, no memos, no interruptions. 2 projects immediately went into production. These innovations would never have happened without dedicated deep work time. The lesson is stark. Shallow work is less vital than it seems. Eliminate big chunks of it, and most businesses won't notice. Replace it with deep work, and breakthroughs happen. So how do you drain the shallows? Several strategies. First, schedule every minute of your day. Not rigidly, thoughtfully. Block out every hour at the start of each workday and assign activities. If your schedule gets disrupted, rebuild it. The goal isn't rigid adherence, it's approaching your time with intention, and this actually produces more creativity, not less. An unscheduled day typically devolves into reactive email checking. A structured day protects time for the concentrated work that genuine creativity requires. Second, quantify the depth of every activity. Ask yourself, how long would it take to train a smart recent college graduate to do this task? Many months means it's deep. A few weeks means it's shallow. Use this test honestly, then bias your schedule toward the deeper activities. Third, ask your boss for a shallow work budget, usually 30 to 50%. This gives you explicit permission to say no to requests that push you over the line. Fourth, and this might be the most powerful tactic, fixed schedule productivity. Pick a firm time when your workday ends and commit to it. Newport uses 5:30, then work backward to find strategies that fit everything into that window. Newport compares himself to a young professor who blogged about a 12-hour workday with 5 meetings and 3 hours of admin, only 90 minutes of real research. Meanwhile, Newport was publishing far more while leaving by 5:30. The secret is that a fixed schedule creates a scarcity mindset. Every new commitment competes against a hard limit. The bar for saying yes rises dramatically. When declining invitations, Newport is clear in his refusal but vague in his explanation. No details that the requester could try to work around, and no consolation prizes that consume nearly as much time. Radhika Nagpal, a Harvard professor, limited herself to 50 hours per week and 5 trips per year. She earned tenure on schedule, jumped to full professor in 3 years, and had her research on the cover of Science. Now this next email tip, this is the one that can save you the most time immediately. Use process-centric emails. Instead of dashing off a quick reply that starts an endless back and forth, take 2 extra minutes to think through the full process and lay it out in one message. Someone writes, "Want to grab coffee?" Instead of "sure," when works. Propose specific days, times, and a location. Consider your reply as confirmation. 1 message instead of 8. Someone sends a draft and says, "Thoughts?" Instead of "I'll take a look," describe exactly what you'll do, by when, and what happens next. Close the loop entirely. The upfront investment is tiny. The downstream savings are massive. And the last tip takes genuine courage, but it might be the most liberating thing you do all year. Don't respond to emails that are ambiguous, uninteresting, or where nothing bad would happen if you ignored them. As one author put it, develop the habit of letting small bad things happen. If you don't, you'll never find time for the life-changing big things. Let's bring this all together. If you take nothing else from this book, remember these ideas. 1. Deep work. Focused, undistracted concentration on cognitively demanding tasks is the most valuable skill in today's economy. It's how you learn faster, produce better, and build a career that can't be automated or outsourced. 2. Deep work is becoming rare. Open offices, instant messaging, social media, and the cult of busyness are systematically destroying our ability to concentrate. This is bad for organizations, but it's an enormous opportunity for you. 3. Deep work isn't just about productivity. It makes your life more meaningful. The neurological, psychological, and philosophical evidence all point the same direction. 4. You can't rely on willpower alone. Build routines, rituals, and systems. Choose a depth philosophy. Track your hours. Create shutdown rituals. 5. Train your concentration like a muscle. Schedule your internet use. Practice productive meditation. Resist the urge to check your phone when bored. 6. Be deliberate about your tools. Adopt them only if they substantially help the things that matter most. 7. Drain the shallows. Schedule your day, quantify depth, set a firm end time. Say no to things that don't serve your deepest goals. And underneath all of these strategies is a single profound truth. It's the idea that connects Jung's stone tower to Gates's Think Week to Grant's locked office door. Newport is honest that the deep life isn't for everyone. It requires drastic changes to your habits. It asks you to leave behind the artificial busyness that makes you feel productive. And there's an uneasiness that comes with trying to produce your best work, because it forces you to confront the possibility that your best might not yet be good enough. But if you're willing to embrace that discomfort, to sit with boredom, to say no to the trivial, to struggle with sustained concentration. Then something remarkable happens. You discover that you're capable of far more than you ever imagined. Not because you became smarter, but because you finally gave your existing talent the focused conditions it needed. Newport's own experience proves this. During his most intensive year of deep work, writing this book while raising a toddler, he published 9 peer-reviewed papers, more than double any previous year. Same brain, same hours, different depth. A deep life is a good life. If this summary opened your eyes, imagine what reading the full book will do. I've put links in the description to grab a copy on Amazon and to listen for free on Audible. Deep Work is one of those books you don't just read once, you return to it again and again. Drop a comment and tell me which idea hit you the hardest. Was it the attention residue concept, the any benefit trap, the idea that your inbox is constructing your reality? I want to know what resonated with you. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. Every week I break down the world's most powerful books, full summaries, deep analysis, ideas that can change your life. One book, one conversation, one step closer to the person you're meant to become. Because the truth is, you're only one book away. Thank you for spending this time with me. Now go build something deep.